So I haven't done one of these videos in a while, but it used to be a tradition of mine to do a pre-event vlog before I go off to a gig. I didn't do one before Northern Arena Toronto because I was just kind of slacking on my part, not getting things done I should have. But I wanted to put a video together as I do travel off the day after I record this video to head to England in Birmingham to do the Gfinity Invitational that's going to take place September 23rd through 25th is the main tournament. And so basically in this video I'm just going to give you a little bit of tournament information. I'm then going to go into kind of just a personal note, what this event means for me, and just talking a little bit about my work over the recent months if you care to hear about that. And then I'm also at the last segment of the video going to do a little bit of a preview for the 4 teams that will be competing in this event. I'll put topic timestamps below, so if you don't need to hear the tournament information because you already know it and you don't care to hear my personal note and you just want to hear the analysis of the teams, then you can just skip right to that. So just to start off with some basic information, again, this is the Gfinity Invitational. It's taking place at EGX, which is like this big expo that goes on in Birmingham in the UK. And on Thursday, the 22nd, we have this thing going on at the booth at EGX where you can play like a pro, where we'll actually take people from the public and let them get into the booths and actually play some games. I think we may even do some fun casts with them. I think that they even may let me or someone else work with some people from the crowd, just like give them a chance to cast a fun little game with the public, just kind of playing some games. It's just going to be really fun stuff, just kind of meet and greet, really light, just a cool type of hangout thing. And then on the 23rd to the 25th, which is Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, will actually be the main tournament. And of course, it's a $100,000 prize pool. There's 4 teams involved in the tournament. Basically, each day will have 1 series played. So Friday and Saturday will be the 2 semifinals matches, and then Sunday will be the grand finals matchup. And from what I believe, I think all the matches are best of 5. So it certainly makes things interesting because now the ban pick phase is going to be a little bit different because you basically only get to ban 1 map per team, and then you basically just pick down from there, and all 5 matches are going to get played. You're just deciding on what order they get played in. And again, this makes it really interesting because it really hurts teams that don't have deep map pools whenever you're going to have to play basically 5 maps outside of your ban and your opponent's ban. So for example, if you're a team like EnVyUs coming into this tournament and you've only played Nuke, I believe, like 1 time with the current 5 that they have, which was just recently at DreamHack Bucharest where they lost to Heroic, and then you also have a map Overpass that you've never played with your full 5 offline and you haven't played it at all, I think, since like February of this year, you're going to have to play one of those no matter what. And so that's just kind of one example of how the best of 5 and how the pick ban works, and how that can kind of throw a wrench in things for certain teams. And so I think that's pretty much it. I mean, you know, it's single elimination, just 4 teams, battle it out, and again, it's a $100,000 prize pool. The talent's going to be at this event, of course, be myself. I'll be an analyst on the desk, but I also may do some commentary. I'm not really sure how it's going to work. Thorin is going to be on the desk, and there's really no need to introduce him. One of the leading CSGO analysts, involved in a lot of different stuff. Thorin's thoughts, does a lot of content. It's going to be awesome to work with him. I've only worked with him directly once before, which was actually at the last Gfinity event, which was when they were partnered with Sivo, and they were doing the Pro League over there, and that was back at the very end of April, beginning of May, so that's quite some time ago, but that's actually the first time I've ever worked with him directly. I had met him at some MLG events earlier. Very nice guy, has helped me out in the past, has even kind of spoken up for me, you know, on publicly endorsing me after the last Gfinity event, and just earning his respect was really cool. And he's fun to work with. He's obviously easy to work with because, you know, I can kind of play to my strengths and he can cover everything else, right? And I think we'll work pretty good together. It'll be fun to do. And then we have Bryce Tacular, who's going to be the host of the analyst desk, and I've actually never worked with him before. I think he comes from Call of Duty. I don't even really know him that well. So it'll be cool to meet someone new, and he'll be doing, I think, his first CSGO event. So it'll be cool to work with him, but he's someone that's, you know, familiar to esports and someone that a lot of people in the community in esports would know for him from other games, I think particularly Call of Duty, so cool to work with him. Then, of course, over on the commentary side of things, you have Metis coming in to be like one of the primary commentators of the event. Obviously, he's very well known, just joined Room on Fire, not Rooms on Fire. He was just at DreamHack Bucharest. He's done some other DreamHack events in the past. I think he's done one of the major qualifiers with ESL. He's done a lot of online commentary for different events. I recently was actually doing the B stream of the ESL Pro League for Europe for him for a couple of days, and he's just an excellent guy. It'll be great to see him again. Me and him actually casted at the last Gfinity event. We had this really cool cast where you casted a best of 5 between Virtus Pro and what is now Immortals, but was previously Tempo Storm with their old lineup, where Tempo Storm beat VP, and it went all 5 maps. It was a really crazy, intense series that lasted several hours. We were just going at it, and it was just such a fun broadcast. And so it'll be great to be able to work with him again and see him and hang out. And then we have Pansy coming in, who, of course, everyone knows her from her work with ESL. She's a great commentator. I've always enjoyed her work. I've never actually spoken to her or met her before, so it'll be cool, again, to kind of meet someone new, work with someone for the first time, someone that I do respect quite a lot in the community, so I'll be happy to meet her. And then we have, last but not least, James Banks, who I knew him from, again, a previous Gfinity event where he was a stage host and did interviews, like in between games and such like that. I think he's going to be serving pretty much the same role at this event, but he also may do some commentary. Again, I'm not 100% sure how everything's going to work out, but that's just some of the people I'll get to work with. And so I think that pretty much nails the tournament information. I think all the matches start local time in Birmingham at around 11 in the morning or something like that. And again, I think it's a best of 5, so it'll probably last until, I don't know, I guess it depends on how many maps get played, but I guess it could last until 5 or 6 in the evening. So pretty cool stuff. And I do travel out for that, like I said. Actually, the day when this video is released, I'm on a plane probably as it gets uploaded, just doing this the night before. So that's a little bit of tournament information for you folks out there. Of course, the teams that are going to be in the event, I guess, lastly, and I'm going to talk about them in detail towards the end of this video, is going to be Godsent, EnVyUs, Epsilon, and Mousesports. And so now, just for a quick personal note here, not going to make this too long, but this is cool. I mean, this will be my second time ever going to Europe. The first time I ever went to Europe was the last Gfinity event, and the last Gfinity event was a very big event for me. If you go back a little bit, I had kind of a rough end of 2015. There was a lot of events I was in the running for, but none of them really panned out, and I was kind of down the dumps, to be honest, and I even thought about quitting. I think I even put out a video saying I was taking an indefinite break. What happened was I did take a break for a little while, but I think James Bardoff was one who contacted me to help do some online stuff for like a Star Ladder qualifier for North America going on at the time, and he didn't have anyone else and just said, can you please help me out? And I wound up doing that and kind of filling in. And then slowly but surely I kind of got eased back into doing online commentary again, and I wound up casting that Season 9 of the CEVO Gfinity Pro League, and that led to me going to this LAN event in April, at the very end of April, where I did some commentary alongside Jackie and Metis, were the 2 people I work with there. Again, I had that big best of 5 series I did with Metis, where it was Virtus Pro versus Tempo Storm, went all 5 mats, crazy intense series. And I got a lot of positive feedback from that cast that me and Metis did, even getting some respect from some of the other talent that was there. Like I know Puckett was there as the desk host, and he was saying, wow, that was a great cast, kept the energy up the whole 6 hours or 7 hours, however long the series last was. And, getting some nods from some of the other people there as well. That was a really big cast for me. And then I got to do some analyst desk segments for the grand finals when SK, which is some of the people that are now in Heroic, but also Pimp was involved. Now he's on Liquid, Asilian, who's now on Splice. And so they had this team, and they were playing in the finals against Tempo Storm. And I got to do a couple of desk segments here in that grand finals where I actually was working Richard, Lewis, and Thorin because Puckett had to leave, and so Richard took over the desk host position, and me and Thorin were the analysts during that best of 5. And they also rotated in Ryu and Launders during that series, and so that's kind of where like Ryu started actually doing some on-camera talent stuff. And now, of course, he's doing ESL Pro League for the NA side of things, and of course Launders has been doing a bunch of stuff since then. And I did the desk segment, and apparently went really well. Again, I got some really positive feedback from guys like Richard, Lewis, and Thorne, even publicly endorsing me. And that kind of catapulted me for a moment there, because as soon as I got home from that, I got invited to do week 1 of E-League, which was the biggest gig I've ever done and the most exposure I've ever had. My social media just grew so much in that period of a few weeks of the Gfinity event and first week of E-League. And then things after the first week of E-League kind of died back down for a while, but that was because, there was actually a break for a while there for a good 3 weeks where nothing was really going on. And then there was already a bunch of events who had already hired people well before I had done E-League. And so I was kind of feeling like, I thought I had my big break, but then things kind of slowed down. I was a bit concerned, but then I got to get into Northern Arena Toronto, which I know there was some issues at that event, no doubt, but it was still a pretty big event to be a part of with a lot of top North American teams involved, and I got to work alongside Vince Lee and Launders and Moses and a couple of new guys, Seaside and True. And I actually had a good time at that event. It was a really rough start, but I had a great time the last 3 days, and despite the drama of the grand finals, I thought things got a lot better throughout the event, and it was still fun to do, and I had a great time working with those guys. And then as soon as I got home, I was doing the EnVyUs tournament, the fall to 2016 Invitational, it just happened. I started casting B-Stream of ESL Pro League with Metis for a couple of days, and then I got this invitation to go to the Gfinity Invitational from the guys over at Gfinity, who of course knew me well from when I had worked with them when they were still partnered with TiVo doing Pro League back in April, and I was at that event I've already talked about. So it was great. This is another gig for me, another chance to get on the analyst desk. This will be, I guess, my third analyst desk gig because like I said, I did a little bit at the last Gfinity event, and I had that 1 week of E-League that I did the first week of the season where I was working with Moses and Richard. So yeah, it's really cool to be at another event. I get another chance to get on the desk and kind of show what I got, basically. I've been, of course, doing a lot of prep, as I always do on these teams, to, really make sure I study how they're playing all the maps and what their results are, what their player form is, what their tendencies and things are. Definitely been keeping my eye on all that, while also keeping up with the NA scene, because, again, I've been doing a lot of work in that lately as well, between Northern Arena and EnVyUs Cup and all that good stuff. So just really happy to be a part of this event. And I think the key thing here is just my mindset's different. Like I said, things really ended roughly at the end of last year for me. And I kind of really just allowed myself to just kind of mope around and just be like a negative Nancy, and my self-esteem plummeted, and I was just in a bad place, and it was just why am I doing this to myself? I have to stay positive. And then even after doing E-League week 1, which was this crazy high for me, after it was over, I somehow still found myself just down in the dumps. I'm just what are you doing? You just had this big gig, just be patient, just wait. And it took a couple of talks between me and Metis and Launders and Moses, who really kind of helped me help get my mind right and focus. And it's I'm getting gigs now, and I just got to keep it up. I got to keep plowing through. I got to just keep working hard, doing my best work, and just let it take me where it takes me and not stress out so much about it. And so I'm kind of coming into this with a new mindset, just trying to stay positive, stay optimistic, and just do my thing. You know what I mean? Just do the best work that I can do. I've prepared as hard as I can, so I just got to go out there and deliver it. And so I hope that you guys will tune in and support, and I appreciate all the support that I've gotten throughout all this time. I'm finally I feel in a good place where I have my head on my shoulders right, and I'm focused and I'm pointing in the right direction, and I'm not letting stints of not getting work or missing out on events getting me down. I'm just focused forward, and so that's good for me. That's a personal accomplishment to finally just be in the right place. Don't get me wrong, there still is some fear that I'm not going to be able to line up consistent work, but I'm really pushing that to the side and not letting it affect my attitude and how I interact with other people and how I approach my work, and that's a step in the right direction. So that's the end of my personal note. And so now let's get on to talking about the teams a little bit here, shall we? And I'm just going to go in alphabetical order with the teams, as this is an interesting event because none of the big front runners are at this event, right? You don't have an SK Gaming here. You don't have the other big teams like a Navi or a Virtus Pro, who just won a couple of titles, or any these big top 5 teams. There's no G2 here. You get my point. The big teams that have been winning titles lately and have been consistently getting top 4 finishes are not at this event. In fact, you have a couple of teams who have been struggling a lot lately. You have this one kind of really experienced team when it comes to top international competition, who have played a couple of events, but who have never really just broken through and had a super crazy result. But they're just trying to transition from that lower tier level to kind of breaking into top international level. And then you have this other team who has just put. We have a couple teams that have put new lineups together, who are trying to, on the Godsent side, they've struggled a lot, and so they're trying to recoup. And then you have this Mousesports team who came off this crazy high of doing well at the first season of E-League to now making a roster change and doing well online so far, but trying to see, can they come to their LAN debut and take care of business, I guess is kind of the point. So it's kind of an interesting sense just looking at it generally. But if we take a look in detail, we'll start off with Godsent. As of course, this is a team that made a very huge change, as they were part of this big Swedish shuffle with Fnatic, where you saw Krims, JW, and Flusha, who had all been playing for Fnatic for a very long time, a couple of years now, coming over and joining Pronax, their old in-game leader, who they had this big history with, starting at, I don't know, the towards the very end of 2014, around August, when they had won that first, when they had started at Gfinity 3, and through that August till the end of that year, they had eight top 4 finishes, including 5 titles. And then their only time outside of the top 4 was that DreamHack Winter event, right, where that whole boostgate situation happened on Overpass. And then in 2015, they continued over, and they had 17 top 4 finishes and 8 titles, and only one placing outside the top 4, which was at Cluj at the major. So they had this crazy history together. Of course, there's this other history, right? Because Snyder's a part of this team, and he was, of course, a part of the original Fnatic that won a major, the first major, but then had kind of fallen off up until they made this change. They brought in Krims and Olaf Meister, and that's whenever they started making their like really big climb at the end of 2014, right? So there's kind of a dual history there between Pronax and some of these other players that are on this Godsent team. And when the Swedish Shuffle happened, when you looked at Godsent, for me, I thought that they initially would be a little bit better off, just simply because there's a lot of cohesion there, a lot of chemistry. Granted, it's chemistry that has been, you know, kind of in the back of the closet for quite some time. But you feel like it would be easier to kind of network that back together, as opposed to a team like Fnatic, who, yes, they still have Olaf and Dennis, who have played together for a very long time, on and off, between LGB days and now having played together on Fnatic since like the end of 2015, where they had won those 3 titles in a row at the end of that year, and then coming into 2016 and playing ever since then, right? So that's almost a year of them playing together on Fnatic. But then you have like Vinton coming in, who's kind of new. You have Lekro, who's just come up, who's spent pretty much all of his mainstay play in Godsent. And then you have Twist, who had been playing for Godsent. And again, someone that Olaf and Dennis are probably familiar with, of course. But you know, he hadn't really been playing at top levels either, even though he's quite a talented player. And so when you looked at the shuffle, to me, it's like, okay, Fnatic clearly have a lot of firepower. And so once they get some time together, they can be a great team. But initially, Godsent may, in the short term, be a bit better. But it hasn't been that way, not at all. You know, first off, they didn't make it into EPL. They played that wild card match against Virtus Pro, and they wound up losing that series. Of course, that's like their first day or so together, so that was understandable. Since then, they had a little bit of online play where they're qualifying for Epicenter. I think that's how you say it, that big tournament's going to take place in Russia. And so far, they're still in the running for that. They've beaten Heroic, they've beaten Mousesports, so that was like they're starting to get some decent online play going. But then a couple of big things happened, right? So in the E-League Season 2 qualifiers, they actually got knocked out by Alternate Attacks, which was just this crazy upset. They had already beaten like this team Deadweight, who I don't really know much about, when they're playing against this German team, Alternate Attacks, and they lose. 1-2, they lose to opening map Dust 2. Very one-sided fashion. You're like, okay, they just lost the first map, not over yet. They wound up winning Overpass, so you're like, all right, they should 2-1 this series. They should still get out of this. They should make it to E-League Season 2, but they don't. They lose on Cash, which you think should be a pretty good map for them given the history, and this is just a huge blow. And the crazy thing is this is happening while they're at Star Ladder I-League, the Season 2 finals. They played their Alternate Attacks match from that LAN venue. I think it was like running side by side. And then at that Star Ladder event, they go out in groups. They beat Dignitas initially, very one-sided win on Mirage, but then they get beat on Overpass by NIP, very one-sided fashion. So now they have to play this best of decider against Dignitas, and they've beat earlier in the tournament, but then in this series, they get crushed on Dust 2, and then they lose a close game on Overpass, and now they're sent packing. So these are two really big upset results for Godsent to not make it out of groups in Star Ladder. Though Dignitas is a good team and they wound up going deep in this tournament and looking really hot, don't get me wrong, they didn't lose to slouches, but this Alternate Attacks loss in E-League Season 2 is definitely the one that really hurts, I think. So they come into this event at a pretty low. Like their initial start with this lineup has not been what they had hoped for and what people expected. But this is a tournament where the field's a bit open, right? You have this Epsilon team who is certainly like an outlier, certainly the underdog in a big way. And then you have this EnVyUs team who hasn't necessarily had the best results, even though things looked a little bit better for them at this DreamHack Bucharest event. Then you have a Mousesports team who has looked hot online and had that big E-League, but they do have this roster change and they had this debut. And so the point is Godsent, depending on who they get matched up with first, should be able to make the final. And then from there, they could win this event if they actually get form out of their players. The bottom line is, though, is that while Pernex has a good game plan in place and tactically they seem fine, there's just some players not necessarily getting individual performances that you'd expect. So Krims, for example, who looked so good at the last major at Cologne when he was still playing for Fnatic, was like one of their best players and was really a big part of why Fnatic made the run that they did at that event, though they did wind up, of course, losing to Liquid, is that he had a really poor StarLadder event. He didn't play that well, very off against NIP. He had a couple of good maps against Dignitas, but also had a couple of rough ones. So it's definitely one of those situations where he didn't look himself at StarLadder. He didn't look on form. I would say JW, same exact situation. He also didn't really have a good time at this StarLadder event. Then Flusha did play pretty decent, but also had a rough map against Dignitas in that decider. And then Schneider, who had looked good at DreamHack Summer and DreamHack Malmö when this team was actually getting top 4 finishes with their original Godsent lineup, where they were showing some promise, he also didn't play nearly as well at StarLadder in comparison to how he was playing at DreamHack Summer and Malmö when they were getting these top 4 finishes. So it's definitely a situation where just like individual form on some of these players is just not where it needs to be. Even if the system in place is great, if people aren't connecting their shots and making plays happen, the press can put them in all the right spots, but if they can't get the kills, then they're not going to get anything done. And so that's kind of the big thing with Godsent, I think, is just trying to get better form out of their players. And this team should be capable of good things. And they certainly could be a team to win this tournament if they can figure it out, if they can get past this kind of hole that they've dug themselves, and that they can start climbing out of it for this event. Then we'll take a look at EnVyUs. So EnVyUs comes into this event most recently having played at DreamHack Bucharest, where they did actually get a top 4 finish. It was one of the best finishes that they've had in quite some time. After this crazy 6 overtime loss to Heroic in the opening match of the tournament, they went on to 2-0 Gambit, and then they actually got their revenge on Heroic. They 2-1 them, eliminated that team from the tournament, which of course Heroic is this Danish team, is looking really hot in the Danish scene, and had some other good results against some other European teams as well, and of course had beat out Echo Fox in Northern Arena Toronto to take a 3rd place, even though they had lost to Cloud9 but before that. So a good result there. Then they wind up playing Cloud9 in the semifinals, and they actually lose. And funny enough, they lose on some of their best maps. They lose on Cash, which is definitely their best map, and one that Cloud9 is comfortable on in the NA scene, but hadn't really played it internationally, so it's picking up Automatic, and they lose that. They win Mirage, which is actually probably on the weaker end of their map pool, and like a really strong map for Cloud9 in all of their play. And then they lose on Dust 2, which again, usually a pretty good map for EnVyUs. So a little bit of a rough loss there to Cloud9. I mean, if they could have made the finals, it's actually been a great result for them. Even if they do wind up losing the VP or something in the finals, if they could have gotten second, that would have been like finally EnVyUs getting a big result. Still, top 4 is not bad, but still not quite where you'd want them to be. They played at the StarLadder I-League Season 2 finals, but they were using Sixer as a stand-in for NBK. And while they did get some wins over, like actually they beat Virtus Pro on Cobblestone, which was like a pretty cool result. They had this really close series on G2 where they lost G2 and Cobblestone, very close games. But again, they're using a stand-in, so can't draw too much from that. Prior to that, though, and the ESL1 Cologne, the major, they actually went out in groups using the Liquid and Mousesports, so really poor result there. In E-League, they're topped their group by beating Virtus Pro, so very good there. But then they got immediately eliminated by the Fnatic in the playoffs in the first round. And then, of course, prior to that, they had DreamHack Malmö, where they actually did get a top 4 finish, beating Tempo Storm and Dignitas, but then losing to Navi. So that's actually a pretty good result, but that's way back in April. That's 5 months ago. Right, so that's kind of been one of their best results of the year, and that's happened some time ago because, of course, prior to that in March, they again, lost out in groups in that event. So that's 2 majors in a row that they've gone out in groups. And then when you go further back than that, they won Game Show at the beginning of the year by beating like Dignitas and Astralis and such, but that's like February, I think. So again, it's been since February, so 7 months since they've won a title. And then they had a top 4 finish in April, and now 5 months later, they finally got a top 4 finish at DreamHack Bucharest. So definitely just not really doing as well as you would think when they have some of the talent that they have on that lineup as far as the skilled players. Their map pool, I mean, again, Dust 2 has looked pretty good for them. They did lose to Cloud9 though, however, in the semifinals of the DreamHack Bucharest event, but they did have a win over Heroic, and I think they are 3-3 on the map in their last 6 offline plays, so it's still a pretty good map for them. Their cash has looked really good this year. They're 9-4 overall this year, and they've won their last 6 out of 7 cash offline games since they with this 5. The only real loss was the one to Cloud9 in the semifinals of DreamHack Bucharest, but they've gotten a couple of wins over Virtus Pro and E-League. They beat FaZe at DreamHack Malmö, though that was some time ago, so cash has always proved to be a pretty good map for them, right? Cobblestone, they've also won the 4 of the last 5 games they've played there. They're 7-4 in the year. Only losses lately have come to Cloud9 and G2, but they have the win over Virtus Pro at Star Ladder, though, of course, with the stand-in. But I will say a lot of their wins are against not top Cobble teams, or at least not top international teams, like when they've gotten wins over Gambit and stuff like that. So certainly some good Cobble results, but they're not against the same caliber of teams as some of their other maps are, right? Then the Mirage seems to be kind of 50-50. They did beat Cloud9 DreamHack Bucharest, and they had this really intense loss to Heroic in 6 overtime, so they've looked competitive on that map. So that maybe that's a map they can still kind of go to a little bit, but it's not like they're really well known for. And then Nuke and Overpass are pretty much no-goes for EnVyUs. And then you have Train, which they also have limited play on with this 5. Lost a couple of times to Mousesports and Liquid at Cologne. They did actually beat VP and E-League on it, which, of course, VP a very monster Train team. So their map pool is okay. They have a couple of clear, really good maps, and they have a few maps that they can be quite competitive on. Individual form-wise, when you look at their players, Kenny S seems to be a guy that you can certainly rely on. He's been playing really well. Apex is the type of guy who can be quite explosive when he's on form. He actually had a really good DreamHack Bucharest event. But then when you look at, say, E-League, or you look at Cologne, or you look at the Star Ladder Season 2 events, those are events where he can have some big maps, but he's not consistent all the way through the event like he was at DreamHack Bucharest. So it's just like, what form is Apex in? He can be one of those explosive entry fraggers in the game when he's on point, but if he's not, it makes things so much more difficult for this team, who are a very explosive, aggressive team, and they use Apex a lot to open things up. And so that's going to be something to kind of keep an eye on, right? You have Happy, he usually always gets good numbers, but he also gets heavily criticized for his leadership and whether he lurks a little bit too long, right? And so that's just something that you have to keep an eye on for this event, though he is a player who is skilled, who can get big numbers. It's just about whether or not he makes the correct decisions and if he plays with his team properly. Then you look at MBK, who's now in kind of a secondary entry fragger role, because you see Devil and Happy playing a lot of peripheral roles. So he has an important job. He's also one of the main side anchors for the team. I would say he played okay at DreamHack Bucharest, the last event before this one. He had a really big best-of-3 versus Heroic. And he looked pretty good versus Gambit as well, though he did have a rough event at Cologne. So if MBK can be on form, and you can rely on Kenny S usually, and Apex is on point, those are the key 3 for me. Those are the map control group. They're the ones that are doing a lot of the action. Whereas someone like Devil, who can give you the good map here and there, but he's never gone positive across an entire event. So you can't really expect him to be your playmaker. So this is a team that has some skill on it. They're a very aggressive team, but they do still have the ability to play defaults, particularly on maps like Cash and Cobblestone and Mirage, the 3 maps where I feel like they really seem to have some good defaults as well as having the explosive executes. So definitely a team that certainly also are a team that, again, this event's so wide open that they are certainly a team capable of winning this. It's just about whether or not their players show up and how they match up with their opponents. Next up is going to be Epsilon, who, of course, this is the underdog, right? They're a team that we've seen them a couple of times on LAN against some decent teams. So they were at the Asus ROG event back in August, where they had actually took second place because they actually beat out Escape, which is this Danish team. Though I think at that event they may have been using a couple of players from a couple other countries as well. And then they beat ENTS, the Finnish team, in a series, so that they won those 2 best-of-3s, and they wound up losing to Space Shoulders, the Turkish team, in the finals. But some of the players on that team were getting noted as performing really well, particularly Draken and Disco Doplin. I think that's how you pronounce his name. I'm not 100% sure with Draken. Draken. Sorry. I'll figure it out before this event starts for sure. They also had a 5th-6 finish at DreamHack Summer prior to that, where they had actually beat Hellraisers in a best-of-3 on Nuke and Mirage. But then they were really competitive against NIP And the next match after that, losing very closely on Overpass and Cache. Both those maps almost went the full distance, or just close to it. So definitely they've had these couple offline events where they've had a couple of cool series, but they never had like a really big event all the way through. Yes, competitive losses are fun to watch and they make you look like maybe you're working on something, but unless you get the W, it's still a loss in the results column. Online, they are trying to qualify for ECS, and I think so far they're still in the running for that, having beating Flipside Tactics included in the games they've played there. They did not qualify for E-League. They lost out in the open qualifiers to Hellraisers. I also think that they were unable to qualify for Epicenter, and they obviously didn't qualify for DreamHack Bucharest. So some of their online play has been a little bit shaky. They also recently lost to Godsent and WESG. And they also played a lot of smaller cups, though, as well. So it's really hard to kind of gauge this team and really read it. Again, I know Draken and Disco Doppelin are players that have looked pretty good, but they've also just gone under a roster change. Zealous is no longer on the team, who've been playing with them for quite some time, and now they're actually playing with Barbar after they had been using Palf as a stand-in for Epicenter qualifiers, and they used Slap, this other Swedish player I don't really know, than DreamHack Bucharest qualifier. So they have been trying to figure out who their fifth was. And of course, Barbar comes from actually playing on Escape for a short time, where he was playing with Jumpy, who now does coaching for Fnatic, and then Dead Fox, who recently just got put on trial for Hellraisers. I don't know if he got picked up fully or not, but I know he's been playing with them and could get a fifth spot there. Just to kind of give you an idea of where he's come from. He's also played on some smaller Swedish teams in the past. I remember him because he had played on, I think he had stood in for like a Public Ear or like a Greyface or some other Swedish team that was competing in some like Sivo main and some different smaller leagues there. So I'd seen his name from there. And so he's like the new fifth coming onto the team. This team strategically looks pretty good. I mean, they can play some solid, default, just spread the map, working picks, map control type stuff. They have some aggressive executes built in. It's kind of map dependent, like a map like Cache, they're fairly default oriented. Whereas a map like Cobble, they again have the very aggressive executes. Same with Mirage, a lot of 1-4 splits thrown into the mix, so it can be quite explosive. So Overpass kind of the same way, like big B rushes and things like that, usually pretty aggressive stuff. Or like even when they play defaults, they don't even really leave someone outside B. They'll just have maybe like 1 stairs and then 4 working A pretty aggressively. So it seems kind of map dependent on what type of style they use, but I guess they lean a little bit more towards the aggressive side. And again, though, they just don't have the same pedigree or same level of experience and top international play as the opponents they're going to have at this tournament. So they're certainly the outlier, like the outsider, the team you don't expect too much from. So we'll have to see if maybe they can cause an upset, because they're probably the team least likely to win, whereas I feel for the other teams it's a little bit open. So we'll certainly see if Epsilon can bring something to the table. And I know they've had a couple of cool series like at Asus ROG and DreamHack Summer, so we'll just see if they can keep that up or not. And then last but not least, we'll talk about Mousesports. So Mousesports, of course, had come off this really big E-League event where they had taken top 4. They were able to play their way through the LCQ, actually beating G2, which was like the first big upset they pulled off. Beating them on Dust 2 and Overpass. Very close games throughout this entire series, but they come out on top. They then go on to beat FaZe after losing the first map on Train pretty big. They come out and blast them on Dust 2 and beat them in overtime on Cache. Very crazy game. And they find themselves in the playoffs, where they then beat Astralis. They 2-0 them. Big win on Mirage, and then a very close win on Dust 2. And then they wound up losing to Virtus Pro in the semifinals, the eventual champions, of course, on Train and Cache, which are 2 very classic Virtus Pro maps, right? So this is a really big result for them, punching kind of above their weight, because outside of this result, things hadn't been going so well. So, for example, right around the same time period, they go out in groups at Cologne, because they wound up losing to Liquid in the Decider, after losing to VP in the opening game, but then beating Envy. They find themselves against Liquid, and they get 2-0'd there. Also at DreamHack Malmö, they take 5th to 8th place, so not a terrible result. They actually get beat out by Godsent, who goes on to take the top 4 finish, even though they did have a couple of cool maps earlier in the group play. I think, if I'm not mistaken, they actually had like a Cache win over Luminosity or something like that. Then, of course, you have MLG Columbus, which is starting to go way back, and that's where actually they went out in groups at that event. Since then, they, of course, made this roster change where they brought in Oscar for Nex. This is actually kind of crazy, because in this situation, you have Chris J, who's their primary operator, now having to move to a different position. So is he still going to be able to play well? Is like the big question. Can he still get it done? Can he still have an impact? Because yes, Nico's an incredible player. He's incredibly versatile. He plays a lot of peripheral roles, but on the Terra side, but he also can get into the mix when it's necessary. He can op, he can rifle, he can be aggressive when he needs to be, he can be, passive when he needs to be, he can make clutch plays happen. He's the player that has had probably a much lesser supporting class around him than other top players have. Like a Cold Zero is like the best player in the world, yet he still puts himself at that same caliber of play. Like the numbers he puts up, you could argue he is the best player in the world. Certainly a top 5 player in the world. I would say top 3. So just an incredibly skilled player, and you know that he's going to be able to perform. Right? He did have a rough time against Virtus Pro in E-League in the semifinals there, but in general, crazy player, just phenomenal talent to watch play. And then you pick up Oscar, who was this opper who had looked really hot on Hellraisers for quite some time, and so far in all of their online play, he's looked incredible. They're 9-5 in the EU division of ESL Pro League. I think they're in the top 4 right now, so they're certainly in playoff contention. They've had some big wins against Invitational and FaZe and Envy, though I think Envy was using a stand-in during that game, but regardless, that's 3 really big 2-0s. They also beat Penta, and they took a map off of G2 on Cash. So getting some good results there. They're in the running for Epicenter. They beat Dignitas there. They lost to Godsent. I think they're still in the running because it's double elim. They did not qualify for ESL1 New York because they lost to FaZe. But in general, their online results have looked pretty good. When you look at the maps, their Dust 2 is obviously very strong. They're 9-1 offline this year. Their only loss comes to Fnatic in overtime at IM Katowice. They have wins over Astralis, FaZe, G2 a couple of times. Online, they're 2-4 on Dust 2 with Oscar, but this is against top quality opponents, right? Like when they lose to Dust 2, they're losing to like a G2, or they're losing to a Fnatic or something like that. The losses are not, against slouches, and they're beating teams like FaZe and like Envy. And so that's going to be a good map for them, of course. Their Cash also has been good at times, though they have lost the last 3 out of 4 times they played it offline. One of those losses, though, is actually a triple OT loss to G2, and that was in E-League. And they've had some wins over some big teams on this map, beating FaZe, they've beat Godsent, they've beat NIP before, they beat Luminosity. So they can play it. And online with Oscar, I think they're 3-2, where they've been able to score wins over G2 is one of them. That was an EPL. And they've also scored wins over Godsent and Epicenter, and a win over Gambit in the ESL1 New York qualifier. So that's certainly a map that they can go to. Their Cobblestone has been a little bit rough. I guess it's like in between. Like they're 6-7 offline on the year, 2-6 the last 8 times they've played it, but they're 3-1 online since picking up Oscar. This includes some wins against Dignitas and a close loss to NIP. That was the only loss they had. So they've been looking pretty sharp online on Cobblestone since Oscar's come on board. Their Mirage has looked fairly good. I think they're 6-3 the last 9 times they played it offline. Some of these wins include beating Astralis, Navi, and Cloud9, with some losses to Godsent and Luminosity. And they're 5-2 online since picking up Oscar, with some quality wins involved in that. So that's been looking pretty good. Now, when you get to the end of this map pool, though, here's where they might struggle in a best-of-5 situation, because on Nuke, they have no LAN play, and the only time they played it with Oscar was a big loss to FaZe in the ESL New York qualifiers. When you look at Overpass, they've only played it once with Oscar, which was a win against Dignitas and EPL, but they haven't played it so much offline. And then you look at Train, that are 1-3 the last 4 times they've played it offline, and they have yet to play it with Oscar online. And so those 3 maps, Nuke, Overpass, and Train, are going to perhaps be issues for them, though their Overpass might be okay. But with having not played with Oscar before yet on Train in an official game, and then Nuke is certainly not an option for them, they're really going to have to rely on their Dust 2, their Cash, their Cobble, Mirage throughout this tournament, which, again, we've seen that they can be capable. And, again, they have the talent, right? Nico, clearly a star player. Oscar has made quite the name for himself with Hellraisers, and they've had great performances for online so far with Mousesports. It's just about the other 3 players for me. Like, is Chris J still going to be able to do good now? Doesn't have his main gun. They still do run a lot of double op even on T sides, so he still gets to use it a fair amount. But it's just about a situation where he's not able to use it. How is he able to perform? That's the big question for me. And then Speedy and Dennis, I feel like when I watch them online, they'll have good games here and there, but then they'll also have some poor games as well. Like it's almost 50-50. So it's just like, are they going to be able to chime in to support Nico and Oscar enough when they go up against like really skilled lineups? Like for example, when you look at Speedy, he looked really rough in E-League Season 1. He had a good game versus Envy in the groups at Cologne, but otherwise really struggled throughout the entire event. He's been hit or miss in EPL. When you look at Dennis, he looked really rough at Cologne in E-League Season 1. He played well in the Cologne qualifier in a couple of maps, but a couple of maps he didn't necessarily do so well. He looked good in the New York qualifier, though the team didn't qualify, but he's been really rough in EPL Season 4. So you see my point, like these performances are all over the place. The other big thing for me with Mousesports is, of course, they recently got rid of Kassad, who was their coach. And so you have to kind of wonder, is that going to hurt them strategically? So far on the online play I've seen, they've looked pretty solid. Like they have a good mixture of the slow methodical default as well as the aggressive executes, particularly when I watch them on Cash and Cobble and their Mirage. You see a really good mixture like on Mirage and Cash of being able to play like the default, the mid control, but also have the aggressive executes. Their Cobble, they can have these really crazy fast 1-4 splits, but they can also play like the slower default. They have various different openings and they can usually read the mid round pretty well. But I do wonder in an offline setting, if not having Kassad, if this breaks down a little bit, can they keep up the soundness of their strategy that they've had, which has looked pretty good in EPL and such that I've watched. And can their players show up? I think Nico and Oscar certainly will, but I think they're going to need more than that to get through games. And so I'll be keeping my eye on those other players to see how they perform around those two stars. And so I know this video has been quite long, but it's now come to an end. I did certainly cover a lot when I've previewed, 4 teams for the event and had a little bit of a personal note and some term information in the beginning. Again, I will timestamp everything, make it very easy for you to get to where you want to go. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you tune into the event. Appreciate all the support. Hope you guys have a good time watching. I'll certainly have a great time being a part of the broadcast. And so, you can follow and subscribe for more content. I'll try to, make videos a little bit more regularly going forward. And that's going to be it. Catch you next time.